What's going on, you guys? My name is Yuki Marai. I'm an energy healer, transformational coach, and I help you heal in mind, body, and soul. Today we're going to be talking about how the autonomic nervous system or the automatic nervous system is directly linked to your physical and mental health. All right? So let's get into it. So the autonomic nervous system controls every automatic or unconscious function in the body, whether it may be your circulation, your digestion, your heartbeat, your muscular contractions or relaxation, nerve firing within your tissues. The list goes on, right? So every automatic function that's outside of your conscious intention and focus, right? So everything that you're doing without even thinking. Right now you're watching this video, your heart's beating for you, you're digesting the food that you just ate an hour ago, your body, your breath is coming in without you having to think, right? There's thousands, millions of functions going on in your body without your conscious awareness. That's how brilliant our bodies are, right? Whatever higher power you believe in, if you do, right, created us. There's an organizing intelligence that created us, and it made us perfect, right? And when we go off of that natural perfection and start to deviate out of our natural blueprint, then we start running into some problems. You understanding me so far? Okay? So, many different things affect this autonomic nervous system, right? And I'm going to get into everything and many of the things that actually negatively affect it and things that you can do to start shifting the nervous system to positively affect it, right? So I believe through my research, through my own healing journey, right, that the autonomic nervous system is what controls your health of your mind, body, and spirit, right? So a dysregulated nervous system leads to a whole host of issues downstream through the entire neurology, biology, and physiology, okay? So some of the things that negatively affect our nervous system, let's talk about it. In our modern chaotic world, it is very unnatural to be in this type of environment for our brains and our nervous systems, right? Because our brains are not as evolved as we think they are, right? So we're still in that primitive state, right? And when we don't live accordance to Mother Nature and how we're supposed to live, then there's ramifications, right? So many of the stimuli coming in from the environment, right? And this is not to fear monger, by the way. This is not to put you in fear, because that fear will make it actually worse, as the nocebo effect in science, right? If you believe something is going to harm you, chances are it will, right? So this is just to bring awareness on the complete package of what brings harmony to the nervous system and what actually takes it out of balance, right? But just remember that your mind is a lot more powerful, right? So what you believe usually will come to fruition. So that's the caveat. Some of the things that may affect it negatively: poor diet, right? Toxins, chemicals, right? People talk about mold, right? Different environmental stressors, toxins, electromagnetic frequencies, blue light, right? EMFs, and a lack of natural light exposure and being in nature. Sitting down for prolonged periods of time without moving the body mindfully, that can affect it, right? Disconnection to the body, right? And living in the head, unable to process emotions, unable to develop relationships with emotions, suppressing emotions, distracting, numbing, and running away from emotions. That is a huge critical part as well, okay? Talked about diet, processed food, right? Food with packaging, with more than 3 or 4 ingredients, chances are there's going to be many weird ingredients in there. That's going to tip your body out of balance, right? Dirty water, right? Unfiltered water. That's going to knock your body out of balance, right? Pharmaceutical medications, that can tip you out of balance, right? Electromagnetic frequencies, too much exposure, right? Without getting in nature, grounding, discharging some of that energy, right? Too much blue light exposure without enough red light or without enough natural light, or wearing protection like blue light blockers at night especially, right? Improper sleep schedules, right? Sleeping similar time every night, getting up similar time every night, preferably before midnight or around 10 p.m., right? Establishing a proper circadian rhythm so that your body's biorhythm starts to harmonize again, right? Because our brains love predictability and consistency, and that's a huge part in developing safety in the nervous system and brain, okay? So if you're constantly sleeping in erratic times, going to bed really late, waking up real early, partying in the weekend, blah, 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 once in a while is okay. But if this becomes your normal routine schedule, then you're going to start to run into problems. How's your sleep hygiene, right? Are you on your phone scrolling before you go to bed? Are you taking in blue light, which blocks your pineal gland from releasing melatonin? So that's going to affect your sleep, right? Many, many factors. Your thought patterns affect your nervous system, right? How are you thinking through the day? Are you thinking negatively? Are you catastrophizing? Are you living in fear in your mind and believing those thoughts, right? Because that's going to tip you into dysregulation, right? Disharmonious relationships, inauthentic relationships, right? Relationships to where you don't feel safe in, right? In your home. Who is around you? Who are the top 5 people that you surround yourself with every day? And do you feel safe, heard, and loved in those relationships? That's a huge catalyst as well, right? Inability to speak your truth, inability to live in accordance to your truth, inability to set boundaries, right? Living for somebody else in society instead of living in your own truth, afraid to speak up when you want to speak, staying silent when you really wanted to speak, right? Saying something that you don't mean just to please another, right? All of these, our body keeps a score. And as a result, starts to tip us over the edge, dysregulating us, right? Many different personality traits that result as a result of childhood trauma, our upbringing, our relationship with our mother and father, their dynamic, and how they parented us, right? External inputs we were getting as we were growing through childhood, right? That's going to affect our nervous system, our personality traits, and how we relate with the world. So common ones may be people-pleasing, overachieving, perfectionism, self-criticism, right? The list goes on and on. Inauthenticity, right? Which kind of goes into people-pleasing, right? So all of those personality traits that were built to try and protect you and survive in the environment, and they served you for a time being, right? Especially when you were a child, because you need to appease and please your parents so that they can take care of you, because we're usually powerless in those infant and formative years, right? So we need to please and placate and appease, right, in order to get our needs met. And as we grow into adulthood, those patterns do not shift, and we're constantly, perpetually living that inner boy or any inner girl within us, right? So those personality traits are revving. It's like a pressure cooker that's revving up our nervous system, right? Right? And we can only live in inauthenticity for too long until, like I said, our body keeps the score, our brain starts to tip over the edge into dysregulation and sensitization, right? I noted quite a few variables there, right? And another thing, like I said earlier, is disconnection between mind and body. Ego and soul, if you want to think of it in spiritual terms, right? If you want to think of it as head intelligence versus heart intelligence, there's many different ways to classify these intelligences, right? But there's basically two intelligences working, right? The heart, the body, right? The soul, the mind, the ego, and the head intelligence, right? And when these are not working in harmony, in unison, right? And one is divided from the other, or one is overworking as opposed to the other, and that leads to dysregulation, right? If we don't know how to access our deepest truth from our heart, our soul, and our body, right? Because our body always knows the truth, right? And it's going to communicate through emotions and symptoms. And if we're not able to listen to the messages, then the symptoms amplify. It's kind of like a child, right? When it's speaking to you, it's trying to, get its needs met, right? If you ignore it, what does it do? Usually it screams louder, right? And the same thing with our bodies, because our bodies do not know language, and it doesn't have the ability to communicate through words. So what does it do? It speaks through the body, through emotions, sensations, and symptoms, right? That's a huge catalyst as well. Purpose, alignment, and authenticity. So whatever vocation or work you're doing, or whatever you're doing for a vast majority of your day, which is work for most people, because we got to work to pay the bills, to eat, right? If that is not aligned, if we work around people that trigger us daily, people that we don't like, or most importantly, because that's adaptable, we can change our perception for the most part, right? And if the type of work is not filling our spirit, is not aligned, is not purposeful, is not fulfilling us, then that begins to drain our bucket as well, right? And like I said earlier, we can only live in inauthenticity for so long before our body starts speaking, right? And many of these factors are within our control to change, right? It may not be immediately, right? Let's say, for example, the work situation. You're in a work and you're kind of tied up in it, right? You went to school for years and now you're in it, and you can't really change that immediately. I get that, right? So can we begin to change our perception of the work, change our relationship with the work, and begin to shift mentally and our paradigm towards the work so that we can find fulfillment in whatever we're doing? Let me give you an example. For me, I used to be in the restaurant business, hospitality, right? And when I was in that business, I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do forever, right? But I just love working with people. I just love communicating with people. I just love influencing people positively. So I took that motivation, right, of influencing people positively, and I took that into the work. So every table that I served, every drink that I made bartending, right, that was my main motive. It's like, okay, I know I don't want to be in this field forever, but my mindset and my perception is going to influence how I feel about it, right? And as a result, I could find fulfillment. Because every person that came to eat the food, I wanted to take care of them to the fullest so that they would have a great experience. Hopefully affect them positively, with energy, with what I say, how attentive I am to them, right? So you can see how In any industry, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, right? So if your purpose is to impact people positively, which is mine, then wherever I go, I can make that the forefront of what I'm doing. Doesn't matter if I'm flipping burgers at McDonald's. I'm gonna make that burger with such love, and it's gonna be the best burger they've ever had because I wanna make their day, right? It doesn't matter if I'm a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I'm looking after the people underneath me, right? That's working for me so that they can develop leadership skills, so that they can become their own leaders, right? So that they could potentially be running their own companies, right? In the future, so that they can perform to their highest and reach their own highest ideal, right? So when I was in the restaurant business, every table that I served, every person that I came across, right? All the way up to when I was managing restaurants, right? And I was looking after a team of people, the entire restaurant, right? Then my purpose became, how can I serve my team members? How can I make them feel appreciated? How can I motivate them and inspire them so that they can in turn take care of our customers, right? So as you see, no matter what position I was working in the restaurant, the ideal and the motive and my purpose remained the same. And as a result, I was able to find fulfillment through the work, no matter which position or circumstance I was in. So just because you're in a job that you may not like, a lot of times it may be your perception of it, right? It may be your lack of gratitude. It may be your lack of clear direction in your purpose. Like, what am I here for? What am I trying to do? What is my ultimate purpose, right? And you can influence, be fulfilled, and have purpose in any environment. It's the perception, you being clear about what you want, and then going after it, right? So you see how without changing the external circumstance, you're still able to find that fulfillment within by changing the perception, right? And an environment still may not be for you at the end of the day. Maybe you have an abusive coworker or a nagging boss that triggers you daily, right? You can continue to change your perception, but at the end of the day, those types of things need to be acted upon. And in that case, just understand that there are opportunities out there for you. You have the tools within you to go into any environment and be able to make a check and to be able to influence people, right? To be able to solve problems. So in that case, you may need to go within, work through some limiting beliefs, some thought patterns, things that are holding you back from moving forward onto something else. Because usually it's because there's something within you that feels like you're not worthy or deserving of moving on. So you end up staying in that limited environment that's not serving you, right? That may be abusive or coercive or triggering you on a daily basis, right? So, because not all triggers are bad, but it could get to the point where if it's not healthy, right? And people are intentionally trying to maliciously harm you, then you need to get out of there, right? So what is it within you that's afraid to move on? Working with the limiting beliefs, right? And then having the courage to move forward to something different, because there's endless opportunities out there and you don't have to stay stuck where you're at, right? So I went off on a little side tangent there, but you get the point. All of these physical, mental, emotional, parasocial, career, financial, and there's also metaphysical and spiritual aspects as well. I won't get into that because that's a whole nother rabbit hole, right? Because I truly believe that we're not just these physical bodies. There's energetic and spiritual influences affecting the physical plane as well, right? I may get into that in another video, but I wanted to keep it more tangible for the audience today, right? I hope all this is landing so far. So I talked about so far, the summary is all the factors from the environment, right? Or our internal chemistry, whether it be our mind or bodies, that are affecting that nervous system that I talked about, right? So now, how does this affect our mental and physical health, right? So how does the dysregulation and the sensitization and the imbalance in the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, begin to affect our physiology? Now we're going to get to the good stuff. So if you want to take a paper and pen out, take some notes, I would, or just rewatch this, right? Because we're going to go into some deep, complex topics, right? So, like I said, the autonomic nervous system is communicating downstream to every cell, organ, and tissue in the body, right? Basically keeping homeostasis in the body. So when that master regulator tips out of balance and gets dysregulated or sensitized, then every downstream function as a result starts to get affected. Okay? So your symptom may be diarrhea, constipation, bloated after your meals, pain in your stomach after your meals, inability to digest, right? Constantly hungry with blood sugar dips and crashes. Others may be something like POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, to where you stand up and your heart starts beating incredibly fast, right? Skipping 50 beats just because you stood up, right? Because your autonomic nervous system controls your heart rate, right? And as a result, the state of that is going to control how regulated the heartbeat is through motion or whatever you're doing, okay? Others may be chronic pain, muscle tightness, right? You may just get spasms or pains out of nowhere in situations that don't even make sense. Excuse me. Right? You may just randomly get a shoulder pain, or you may get back pain that doesn't go away or comes and goes, right? You may get foot pain when you walk, or you may get hip pain, you may get pelvic pain, you may get headaches, migraines, right? All of that shuttles into the chronic pain aspect, right? And that is controlled by the autonomic nervous system and the brain as well, right? Because the brain creates all pain in the body, right? If you break an arm, your brain is going to send a signal to that arm so that you stay off of it, so that it can heal and repair, right? But what controls the pain is the brain, right? So chronic pain, stiffness in the muscles, maybe flaccid and weak muscles, that's also controlled by the nervous system, right? Depending on if you're in a sympathetic tone or a deep parasympathetic. If you think about the polyvagal theory, branches of the nervous system, right? It goes from ventral vagal, and it goes to fight or flight, and then it goes to dorsal vagal shutdown, right? So when you're in dorsal vagal shutdown or deep parasympathetic, usually your muscles will be more flaccid, weak, right? And you just feel fatigued and weak, and your body just feels like it can't go, right? When you're in that sympathetic tone or the fight or flight, then chances are your muscles are tight, right? It's hard for you to relax. You just feel tight everywhere, right? And it's hard for you to relax. It's hard for you to, you're just in that sympathetic, anxious, buzzy tone, right, in your nervous system. So you see how your muscles, pain could be affected by it. Others, it may be temperature dysregulation, right? So you just get hot and cold out of nowhere. You get extremely cold, you can't tolerate the sun or heat, or either you can't tolerate cold or anything cold, right? So you're just layered up in like 3 different jackets. I've been on both ends of the extreme, by the way. And what am I missing here? Skin issues, right? Skin issues. You may break out in hives. You may have acne everywhere because your autonomic nervous system controls your immune system, right? And a lot of those skin problems are because of the immune system flaring up, right? You may get eczema, you may get psoriasis, you may get like a mast cell activation reaction when you eat, or you get hives, redness all over your skin. All of those are controlled by the autonomic nervous system as well, right? So you see how the list goes on and on. So many different functions, right? And all controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So when that becomes out of balance, you can see how it affects your physical body, right? Anxiety, depression, right? All of that as well, right? Intrusive thoughts, panic attacks, right? All of that is controlled by the autonomic nervous system and brain as well, right? Because when your brain and autonomic nervous system doesn't feel safe, it's gonna do whatever it can to keep you put right there so that you're safe, right? Because if there's a saber-toothed tiger or a lion that's about to eat you, the safest you are is right there in your room, in your dark room, just staying put so that you don't get eaten if you go out there, right? So whenever you try to go against that, then you're gonna get consequential thoughts, you're gonna get physiology that erupts in your body to try to keep you put and keep you safe. So at the basis of it is, if the brain and autonomic nervous system doesn't feel that you're safe in your body and in your environment, it's gonna kick out these mental, physical symptoms, right? Via emotions, sensations, and symptoms that ultimately have a cascading effect in your physiology, right? So when you start to create safety again, when you start to regulate that nervous system, when you start to bring coherence into the brain, the heart, and the nervous system, then naturally these symptoms start to fall away, right? So at the core of it, right, I mentioned all of those other external factors along with internal factors, but at the core of it, what the brain and the nervous system is making sure is that you are safe, right? And if you are safe enough, then it's gonna allow you to move forward, right? And the symptoms will slowly start to drain away, right? For me, until I understood this in my healing journey, nothing really changed. You know, I would have sporadic improvements and then I'll crash back down, right? When I was at my sickest, right? I was in bed in my mom's basement in a dark room, couldn't feed myself, could barely drink water. Sitting up for like 10 seconds wiped me out for weeks, right? Could barely turn over in bed. I was peeing in like these bottles and then my mom would come clean it up. I had to crawl to the bathroom. And the worst part, I don't even think I should be sharing this, but I couldn't even crawl to the bathroom one time, so I literally had to shit in a bucket, excuse my French, and then I would just cover it up, and then my mom would go flush it for me. And then at that point, I was like, wow, my life is over, you know? Like I felt like a 95-year-old ancient man. And here is my mom and my sister just taking care of me, you know? And I was a ripe age of 27 at the time, you know? So you can see how that could be humiliating for a young man, right? Losing everything, losing my health, losing my money, losing my car, losing my friends, damn near lost my family, right? Because I thought I was going literally insane, right? Could barely remember anybody's name. I couldn't string together coherent sentences. Felt like I had early onset dementia. Just symptoms all throughout my body. Like I had shooting pain everywhere. Felt like my body was just burning, you know, like just heat like I've never experienced, you know. I would be drenched in sweat or just be completely cold and shivering. So I had to have like 5 layers. Couldn't handle light or sound, so I was in a completely pitch dark room. The only light I could see was like the crevices of the door and then my family in the living room, right? And them being in the living room talking was too much sound for me. So I would have these big earphones on and then these shades. It's kind of funny looking back, but in the moment it was pure hell on earth. And any of you that have experienced anything like it, you know, you know? And then on top of it, you go to the doctors and none of them have any idea what's going on, you know? I got diagnosed with like 7 different conditions, but they were all like kind of like pseudo diagnoses, you know, anything from chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, mast cell activation, POTS, Lyme disease. What else was there? And then the mental health side, major depressive disorder, and clinical anxiety. They even one doctor even tried to just diagnosed me with schizoaffective or schizophrenia, because like I remember when the psychiatrist came to evaluate me, because basically what happened was I got so sick to the point where I went to all these different specialists, all these different alternative, I mean, just dozens and dozens of practitioners. And then my parents basically had enough, so they're like, you need to be hospitalized. So I basically went to the hospital, and then obviously like they couldn't find any things on the scan and stuff. So they're like, they just kept sending me home, you know? But then my sister found a psychiatric hospital. So they basically took me to a psych ward, right? Not me unknowing. And I'm in this bed and I couldn't handle the light and sound. So I'm like covered in this blanket, just hiding. And then the psychiatrist comes in and he's just trying to talk to me, and I could barely like understand what he's saying. So I'm just like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. So you couldn't really get any good information from me because I was just way too overstimulated and way too afraid. So he just diagnosed me with schizophrenia because he thought I was literally going insane, you know? So yeah, good times, you know? But as you see how literally the autonomic nervous system could start firing out so many different symptoms, and they're absolutely debilitating, right? Because think about it. If an animal is scared, right, then the organism is going to do whatever it can to keep that animal safe, because the body and the brain always wants the best for you, right? And like I said earlier, it doesn't know how to communicate in words. So it's going to kick out these emotions, sensations, and symptoms, right? Until we take heed and start noticing, right? And we start regulating and start taking our agency back. But if we don't, then the spiral and the cascade begins, and the domino effect, right? And then what happens is the symptom comes, you become afraid of the symptom, and then it amplifies the symptom, and it's a negative feedback loop, right? And then now you start searching, trying to fix it, and then that signals more danger to the brain and nervous system. And that's a cascading effect. And as a result, you end up like me, completely bedbound, unable to function, you know, just completely debilitated, feeling like you're dying, right? So that's one end of the extreme spectrum, right? But most people are operating from a minor form of what I went through, right? So what they have is usually like maybe some pain in the back sometimes, right? They may have slight anxiety, right? Just this underlying current of like, oh, I'm not okay, but I could still function. Or maybe they just have like this emptiness and just depression to where like nothing seems pleasurable anymore, and they're just going through the motions, right? And they're just kind of going through life, but their spark has been dimmed and they can't connect to that joy and that pleasure anymore, right? Others, it may be they have gastrointestinal issues, so everything they eat basically comes out, or they get incredibly bloated and pain in their stomach after they eat. They may have constipation, diarrhea. Others, they may have periodic headaches or migraines that last a couple days, and then they're able to go back to life. Others, they may have chronic skin issues. They may have eczema, psoriasis, flare-ups in the skin. Others, they may have temperature dysregulation, so they get hot, cold, all these I already mentioned, right? So many people are just operating on that medium tier of like, okay, they're having symptoms, but it's not too debilitating to where they need to cancel all obligations and retreat from life, right? So, and then others haven't got there, but they're starting to creep towards that zone, right? Because this modern life right, without awareness, without practices to balance it, could tip us over the edge, and most likely will if we're not cognizant and aware of this type of work and what's actually happening, and practices to actually, discharge some of that energy and process some of those emotions and to be able to regulate as we're going along, right? So you see it all the time to where you have high performing entrepreneurs, CEOs, business owners, right? On the outside, they look like they got everything figured out, right? They got the business, they got the wife, they got the woman, they got the man, they got the cars, they got all the external stuff. But what happens? Ultimately, either their mind or their body begins to have some issues, right? Or, behind the scenes, they're suffering, right? They may have major anxiety, panic attacks, depression, right? But then they need to continue to show up because they've already built this empire and they can't just let it go, right? So you can see how that becomes a trap as well. And then they built a life that they can't escape from, right? And then eventually that could lead to chronic issues, chronic health conditions, chronic mental, physical health issues, right? If you look at, what's his name, Chris Williamson right now, the famous podcaster, he's having some major issues. I think he's going through chronic Lyme disease, right? And he's trying to hammer it through with all of these external things. Like, he's doing the hyperthermia, he's doing the ozone, he's doing the stem cells, all the external stuff, right? But ultimately, without regulating the nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, what's going to happen is all of those external treatments, if you don't feel safe enough to receive it, your body's just actually going to reject it, right? I did this for years, right? I tried every alternative therapy there was, right? There was a point where I was drinking my own urine. Like, that's how desperate I was, And luckily, I didn't have any fecal transplants or any of that crazy stuff. But, talking about the hyperbaric oxygen, the ozone, the acupuncture, the herbs, the thousands of supplements, the cold plunges, sauna, the PMF, the vagus nerve stimulators, the shamans, the spiritual healers, the psychedelics, you name it. I went down the gamut. The fasting, the dry fasting, damn near killed myself trying to fast and dry fast, It was a wild journey. But you get the point here. All of that external shit is ultimately not going to help you, right? If you don't regulate the nervous system and build safety and capacity within to be able to receive it, right? So now that we've established the basis of how the autonomic nervous system controls every automatic function and can create physical and mental symptoms in the body as a result, right? And what may tip it over the edge into that dysregulation, right? And what are some symptoms as a result of what's going on here, right? And what is some things that you can start to implement into your daily life so that you can start to regulate this nervous system, create safety within your body and your brain, right? Because if you're not at that extreme state that I was in, it's going to benefit you greatly, right? To begin to implement these practices, right? So worstly, you don't get to that point. This is not me forecasting or fear-mongering in any way. I've just seen it with many people to where they were the type A, go, overachieving personality like I was. And then eventually their body broke down, right? Because no organism can live in stress and survival for a prolonged period without proper rest and recovery, right? And also, by regulating this nervous system and building safety, it's going to translate to every aspect of your life, not just your health, mentally and physically, right? Because when you're in a regulated state in your nervous system, and when you have the skill sets and frameworks, right, and the practices to return back to that, right, you start to build agency with your body. You start to connect with your true self again, right? Not this fabricated self that society wants. This mask that you've been wearing and this character that you've built in order to survive in the world, right? You start to reclaim your inner voice and authority. And you start to live from that sovereignty and that authenticity, right? And through that, you're going to develop better relationships. You're going to develop better business opportunities. You're going to develop more fulfillment in the work that you're currently doing or choose to do, right? You're going to be able to enjoy the things that you already have and are coming to you as a result of you feeling safe again, being able to feel in your body again. And feeling is not just about quote unquote negative emotions. I don't believe there's any negative emotions, only when you perpetuate it with the thought that creates the feeling, right? So anger can be productive. Anger can be motivating. Anger is a powerful life force, right? But it's meant to be felt, right? Moved through and extracted the wisdom from the experience and then moving forward as a better individual, or using it as fuel to motivate you to move forward towards something that you want, right? But when you fester in it and you continue to replay the story and continue to fire the same feelings, that's when it becomes toxic, right? Similarly, if you cannot go to the depth of your negative emotions or uncomfortable, right? Unaccepted emotions of yours, whether it may be anger, shame, guilt, grief, sadness, all of those. If you can't go into that and experience that, then it's going to be difficult for you to actually experience the fullness of what's on the other side, which is the pleasure, the joy, the fulfillment, the love, right? Because everything in life is polarity and duality, right? There can't be love without hate. There can't be light without darkness. There can't be north without south. There can't be east without west, right? There can't be cold without hot. There can't be masculine without feminine. There can't be yin without yang. You get the point, right? So by you learning about your body, learning about your nervous system, learning about your physiology and your psychology, right? And beginning to learn about yourself ultimately and your soul, you start to develop a deep relationship with what's in you, right? Shadow and light. In this case, uncomfortable negative emotions and positive feeling emotions, right? So by us being imbalanced towards either side, it tips the nervous system over the edge, right? Because we can't be one without the other. And when we fractionate a part of ourselves, whether we deem it as negative or dark, then the other side is going to have an equal consequence or repercussion, right? So it's kind of like when you go into a relationship, right? And then the first phase of that relationship is the honeymoon phase, like they call. It's all love. It's all light. It's all love. Oxytocin, dopamine, all these neurotransmitters and hormones flooding your system. It's almost like the first time you experience love again. A familiar yet unfamiliar feeling, right? A love that surpasses all understanding, right? And now you're just linked with this person. It's like, I found my soulmate, right? And your heart is just expansive and open. We all know that feeling, right? But what happens a couple months down the line? 3, 4, 5, 6, right? We're lucky if we last that long, right? What happens is the humanity hits. The law of familiarity hits. We start to see the person as not this mystical person, but now it's just a normal person because you've been around them enough. They have their own shadows, they have their own darkness, they have their own quirks and triggers, right? Something about them triggers you, something about you triggers them. Now you're coming back to reality, right? And we don't stay in that love and light forever because everything is polarity, like I said. Doesn't mean that you can't stay in that the majority of the time, but there are going to be moments where, the shadow comes out. There may be some friction, there may be some tension. That's normal part of relationships, right? Anybody you love, you also hate at certain points, right? Anything in the light is also dark at times, right? It's kind of like when the sun comes up, the sun goes down at the sunset, what comes up? The moon, the darkness, right? Everything is a rhythm in life, right? And when you start to disrupt that rhythm, then things go awry, right? And then the homeostasis collapses, right? So in that relationship case, the shadow starts to come up, right? Things that you may have not seen in the beginning that you don't like, right? That trigger you. Things from childhood that are getting brought up from maybe mom and dad that they're reflecting upon you. Triggers are coming up and it feels uncomfortable, right? And in that moment, what most people do is they distract, they numb, they project, right? They deflect, right? Instead of seeing the part of themselves within them that are being triggered and being able to thank that person for reflecting that mirror upon you so that you can actually heal that wound, right? What we do is we project it upon them, right? We attack the mirror instead of observing and thanking the mirror. Not even just thanking it, but just being able to observe it and understand it, right? And then take in the wisdom that's coming in. Because anything that gets triggered within you from another is always a wound within you that is yearning to be healed, right? So long story short, like I said, the relationship doesn't stay in that honeymoon phase or love and light forever, right? We start to get familiar with each other, the shadows come up, and it's our choice to either run or to face it, right? To sit with, distract, and numb, right? To project and blame as opposed to taking responsibility, right? Not to say if they're doing anything toxic or abusive, there's a difference. You got to be able to identify that as well, right? So by regulating the nervous system, like I said, you're going to have more balance in your life, but a good balance, right? The highs aren't going to be as high, the lows won't be as low, right? And you can experience incredible highs, but you're able to come back down to reality, right? Because when you look at bipolar disorder, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, by the way, but I've been through enough psychiatrists and therapist psychologists that I've worked with in my journey, and I was pretty much going through many different mental health institutions for about almost 2 years because things got too chaotic in the home, and then my parents set a boundary and they basically, sent me off to these institutions, and I was going through these mental health rehabs. So I saw many different aspects of and varieties of mental health conditions, and one that was prominent was bipolar disorder. And one thing that I noticed and learned about bipolar disorder is, even though I don't like labels, because I don't believe in that, but this is just to give you frame of reference. When you go manic or you go super high, that's when people are like, oh, I am God, or I am the second coming of Jesus. It's almost like a spiritual psychosis they get into. It's like the highs are so high, but what happens is the crash is equally as low, right? That's when your nervous system and your brain is out of balance. So it doesn't know how to regulate and keep you in that mid zone of balance, right? So it goes really high, and then what happens? You crash and you're really low for weeks, right? That's basically what happens in bipolar disorder, right? Due to the fact that you cannot regulate your nervous system and your brain is dysregulated, right? So it can't find that harmony in that sweet spot, right? Of not too high, not too low. And usually that's where the most peace, love, groundedness, and fulfillment comes, in that mid zone, right? So by us doing the work, like I said, not only does it prevent us from going to the extreme of extreme illness, extreme mental health crisis, but also within our life now, in the container we're in, we're able to enjoy it, be more fulfilled, experience pleasure, be more connected in our relationship, more purposeful in our work, help more people, do what we love from our soul because we're connected with our bodies again and we feel safe enough to feel, right? So I hope all this is landing. So nervous system regulation, or coming back to balance, learning about self, right? And these internal practices that help to rewire the brain, the body, and the spirit ultimately. This work is for everybody, right? Especially if you're living in the modern world, the Western world, if you're living in the States, right? if you're not living on a homestead, growing your own plants, vegetables, having your own animals, living in accordance to nature, right, with a beautiful family and beautiful parents, right, that we're aware, right, chances are we all have some work to do, okay? So I'm going to begin to talk about what are some things that you could tangibly do, right? What are some frameworks that you can begin to adapt in mind and body, right? And how you can start implementing it in your daily life, right? This is not a prescription, by the way. It's not medical advice at all, okay? This is just me relaying to you, right, what I've learned through my healing journey and my understanding that I've developed through my studies over the last decade of studying the mind, the body, and the spirit holistically from the inside out, okay? So take what you want and leave the rest, and begin to implement whatever resonates with you, and then just start to play with it, you know? No matter what stage you're in your healing journey, or no matter what block you have in your life, right? These practices will begin to help you learn and know thyself, help to build safety within your brain and body, right? Help to start to shift the perception of your body, yourself, right? And the world around you, right? And all of these are quintessential for whatever area that you're trying to improve in, okay? So, the number one thing, right, among many, but the number one thing is developing space in your schedule to where you're able to be with yourself, right? You can call it meditation, you can call it sitting, you can call it self-reflection, right? And it doesn't have to be the primary form of meditation that we think about, right? Of just sitting, closing your eyes, listening to music or not, right? And just sitting and breathing, right? That could be torturous for some people, and I get it, right? I've worked with many people to where meditation is like grinding their teeth, and it's very difficult, right? But there's other things that you can do, right? You can find that reflective time in nature, right? Chilling with the birds and the trees, right? Just orienting, observing the environment, just looking around, orienting to your environment, right? Dr. Peter Levine in Somatic Experiencing, the creator, right? Incredible trauma doctor, right? And he's one of the leaders in this field. And he basically coined the term orienting, right? If you look at any animal in nature, after there's a predator, right, and there's danger, what's the first thing they do? They shake off, right, the stimulus and the trauma, right, through their body, right? They shake it off, and then what do? They go back to grazing, and they observe the environment. They look around. They're like, okay. And by looking around in the environment, it's signaling safety to your body. Like, okay, I'm here. There's nothing crazy going on here. Okay, might actually be safe, right? So you can do that, orienting, right? Grounding, right, in nature, putting your bare feet on the ground. And you could orient while you're putting your bare feet on the ground. And a lot of these practices, right, it's called habit stacking, but you take what you want, you leave the rest, and then you develop your own little cocktail, right, of what works for you, right? That brings the regulation, brings the presence, right? And then eventually you make your own, which fits in your schedule the best, right? Based off of your personality, what you like, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So, and none of these are based off of urgency, right? I don't want you guys to take these practices and implement it with urgency and pressure, because that's actually going to make it worse, right? If you're pressuring yourself that I need to heal, I need to get better, I need to improve, then that's actually dysregulating you even more, right? Because it's actually reminding your core being and reinforcing that limiting belief that I'm not enough right here, right now, right? So take these practices with almost like a playful attitude, okay? And I know if you're suffering deeply, it's going to be hard to get to that point. I've been there. But if you can't be playful yet, with a little bit less pressure, like I'm just going to do this to curiosity, right? Curiosity instead of pressure, okay? So, number one thing, finding time to sit with ourselves, right? It could be so minute throughout the day. It doesn't have to be an astronomical 1 or 2 hours, right? Eventually you could get to that point, but that's unnecessary as well. Finding 5-10 minutes in your day, right? To reflect, sit with yourself, see what's happening in your body, right? Without trying to change it or fix it, right? Just observing what's happening and just connecting back to your breath, right? Observing what's happening in your body, observing what's happening in your environment, right? And that's a great place to start, right? And if observing your body feels too overwhelming, that's okay too, right? Just start very, very small, okay? If you have really uncomfortable sensations or symptoms, you have really bad pain and it's too difficult, that's okay, I've been there, right? Just start with 5 seconds, right? 5 seconds. Observe a part of your body that actually feels neutral or actually even a little bit pleasant, right? Let's say your hands feel kind of safe, right? Your hands feel okay, my hands feel okay. So just breathe into your hands for 5 seconds. Let it go, and then just go back to looking around in your environment. Okay, that didn't kill me. I'm okay. Cool. All right. And then start to observe your thought patterns, right? Without judgment, without trying to change it. Just observe it. See the stream of consciousness that's flowing through, right? Just imagine like a river, right? And the water's flowing horizontally this way, right? And this is your mind, right? And the thoughts are just flowing through that water. And I want you to imagine like, okay, what's coming through? What's coming through this stream of water, right? Now you're starting to, this is called metacognition in neuroscience, right? Thinking about your thinking or becoming familiar with your thinking, right? And this is one of the most critical skills for us to learn, right? And come back to. It's not even learning because it's innate within you, but we just become so distracted and stressed that we just lose that ability to observe, right? So the key here is being a witness and an observer, right? Becoming the awareness of your experience instead of being attached to it, right? Eckhart Tolle talks about it, famous spiritual teacher. If you read The Power of Now, A New Earth, great books, by the way. His main tenet is just presence and awareness, right? Just being okay with what's happening now and just observing it without attachment, right? And becoming the awareness behind your experience instead of being attached to it and being engulfed by the storm, so to speak, right? So creating a little bit of space between you, the observer, and the awareness, and the thoughts, the feelings, and whatever's going on in your environment or your body, right? Now, through that space that you create, there could be a little bit more objective thinking, right? A little bit more rational thinking, a little bit more logical thinking, right? So now you're not as attached to the outcome or whatever's going on. You're not trying to change it or fix it. You're just watching it. So imagine the analogy again, like the river, and then the thoughts are moving through, right? And you're just watching it. And the number one thing here is to not try to redirect it, stop it, change it, right? That can be effective as well. But to start, I want you to just establish that metacognition again, right? Becoming familiar with your own thinking and your thoughts, okay? And I want you to just watch it. And do this for about 10 seconds to begin, right? 10 to 30 seconds, okay? You don't need to start big. And then try to just observe about 3. There's going to be many thoughts that come in usually. And then a lot of them won't be pleasant. I'm going to warn you, right? But remember, you're not your thoughts and you're not your mind, right? You're the awareness observing it. So that's where the space and the detachment comes in. You're going to watch the thoughts. And then I want you to write down a couple of those thoughts that came in, okay? Just write it down without judgment, without observing it. It may have been, oh, you look so stupid in that outfit today, or you're not enough. You'll never get better. Just stop watching this. Yeah, just give up, right? You know, all those negative self-critical thoughts, right? And a lot of them sometimes don't even make sense. It's like, you know, it'll start bringing up thoughts and memories about, you know, something you did in third grade, you know, and just out of nowhere, right? So you can see how the mind or the thoughts, none of it is rational, right? And then you begin to observe it, like I said, and detach from it. And then you start to be able to, you know, you'll eventually get to the point where you could find humor in it, right? You're like, you could just laugh at a thought. You'd be like, yeah, you'd be like, oh, look at your big ass nose, Yuki. You're so ugly. And then I'll just be like, nice, thank you, right? And I'm developing this, almost this relationship of just humor. It's like a funny, anxious friend that just talks shit to you, you know? That's how I look at my self-critical part now, or my mind, right? I just look at it as some humorous, anxious friend that just likes to poke at you and ultimately wants the best for you, but doesn't know how to communicate it well, you know? So by observing the thoughts, you're detaching from it, right? You're beginning to learn that, oh, I'm not my thoughts, right? And just because I have that thought, I don't need to believe it, right? And thoughts aren't facts, right? And you start to detach from that egoic mind, or the thinking brain, or the head intelligence, right? And then you're able to detach from it, you're able to watch it. And now, as you watch it, you create a little bit of space, right? Now you have a little bit of safety there, like I'm not my thoughts, so you're not attached to it too much. And then you can start rewriting the blueprint there, right? You can start doing subconscious reprogramming work to imprint new thoughts and beliefs, right? But let's just start small for today, okay? I'll get into more deep subconscious reprogramming, right? To eradicate limiting beliefs, to install new thoughts, behaviors, things like that, right? But it starts with the fundamentals and the foundationals always, right, for change. And the fundamentals and the foundations is to be able to learn to be with yourself a little bit more each day, right? To be able to learn things about yourself, your body, your subconscious, how you operate, and to become more aware through metacognition of what's actually happening here and in the body, right? And also through interoception and exteroception. Interoception is you becoming aware of what's happening in your internal body, in your chemistry. Exteroception is your ability to recognize what's going on in the environment, right? So now you're establishing connection to your body, right? Through interoception, what's going on in your body. You're establishing metacognition. You're becoming aware of your thoughts, right? Becoming familiar with those common thinking patterns. And then through exteroception, orienting to the environment, becoming aware of what's going on in your environment. All of this is creating safety in the nervous system, right? Little by little, right? You're turning that knob back to rest and digest, to the ventral vagal state of the hierarchy of our nervous system, right? Ventral vagal state is connection, safety, rest and digest, right? And now you feel connected and safe enough to be in your environment, to move forward, okay? So establishing that connection within, having a ritual or practice without pressure and force. And if you miss a day, so be it, okay? This is more about curiosity and play here. Like, okay, I'm just sitting with myself. All right, interesting. Huh. Okay, let's watch my thoughts real quick. You could time yourself 5 to 10 minutes. You don't have to time it, you know. But eventually, as you get versed in this, you could just just throwing this into your day throughout the day, little by little, right? It may be in between your work meetings. It may be after breakfast. It may be right when you wake up at night, when you're in the bath after work, when you're showering, right? Right. But in the beginning, it's important to just establish a routine, right? And then you show up for yourself daily. Just pick a time to where it's the most comfortable, you can relax and do it that time. And eventually, as you master it, you can start implementing it in your daily life slowly but surely, right? Implementing it more frequently, right? You'll start small. 5 to 10 minutes sitting with yourself, okay? Observing what's going through your mind, right? What are the thoughts coming in? Just watch it, right? Just by watching it and creating space, you're already starting to disidentify with the thoughts. And that's the most important thing. And when you disidentify it with it, you don't need to attach yourself to it. And you don't need to believe it. And when you don't need to believe it, you're less afraid of it, okay? Connecting with your body again, little by little, right? Feeling a good sensation in your body, something that feels a little comfortable or neutral, right? And then eventually you could work towards just feeling what's actually there, right? Even the uncomfortable sensations, right? So as I close my eyes, I feel like some pressure in my head here, right? Just observing that and just breathing into it. Just watching it without judgment, right? You get the point here. Connecting with the body again, that creates safety, right? And over time, as you build that capacity, you're going to be able to feel deeper. You're going to be able to process more emotions. You're going to be able to process more suppressed energy in your system. And as a result, you create more space in your body, and that creates safety in your nervous system and brain, right? And through that extra space, you're able to allow in more good, okay? And then, like I said, getting familiar and oriented to your environment, right? Because a lot of times we go through our day and we're not really conscious of our environment. We're just kind of going through our day, but we're not aware, like, wow, look at the trees. Wow, look at the sun today, right? We're not appreciating what's around us, you know? And by appreciating and really being in awe and taking in what's in our environment, that creates safety, right? Because gratitude is a signature of love, right? And when you're in that loving, grateful frequency, your heart recognizes it, right? And when your heart recognizes it, right? If you look at Heart Math Institute and heart-brain coherence research, they're doing great work over there. The heart actually communicates up to 10 times more up to your brain than your brain does to your body, right? So basically, they found that the heart has a brain, and it has something called sensory neurites, which communicates up to your brain that all is well, all is safe, it's time to create and rest again, right? So the heart, by activating that through positive, heartfelt emotions, through love, through gratitude, you're communicating safety directly to the heart. And then as a result, the heart communicates safety to the brain, right? So it's an intimate relationship going top-down processing, as taught in psychology, or bottom-up processing, body to head or head to body, okay? So, super simple practice, but it's a great place to start, right? Just having time throughout the day to observe thyself in mind, body, and then observe the environment, right? Because the awareness and the observation is already creating a shift, right? When there's studies in quantum physics, the double slit experiment in quantum physics, basically what they found is that there's a petri dish, and then there were some particles in the petri dish. And when the particles were observed, it shifted and changed immediately as the observation, right? And then when the observer was taken away, the particle went back to its normal form, right? So what that means is that when you observe something, whether in the body or in the environment, just by your observation, it's actually already shifting, right? Through that experiment, really shine light on the fact of awareness and observation actually creates change. And then when you add loving awareness, it actually creates positive, beautiful change, right? So the ingredients of your awareness is very important, right? So if you look at Masaru Emoto's water experiment, right? He froze water particles, and then he put it over a petri dish. And what he did was the crystals of the water changed form based off of the input from the environment. So when words like love, peace, gratitude, joy, God were placed above the water, the crystal was harmonized, and it was this beautiful structured crystal, right? But when there were words like hell, I hate you, you suck, then the crystals of the water were disformed. It was all dark and disentangled structure, right? So that was a direct reflection, since we're 80% water, that the input, loving or hateful, positive or negative, has a direct reflection on the particles of the water, right? So you can see how that can affect our physiology negatively, since we're mostly water, okay? So it's about the observation and the awareness, right? And if you can't get to that positive, loving state, totally okay. Just stay neutral, right? Because if you're neutral, you're not tipping over to the negative, right? And then you're not negatively affecting yourself. But creating the observation, you're creating the practice and the safety most of all, so that eventually you can start influencing positively, right? You can start doing positive affirmations, changing your thought patterns, right? Sending loving intention to your body and your brain and the world, right? And that's all going to have a cascading positive effect on our physiology, neurology, and biochemistry, okay? So, sitting with yourself, number one thing, right? And just by starting there for 5 to 10 minutes, that's the number one thing, right? And then you can build upon that, right? But by starting there and consistently doing it, you'll immediately start to feel changes, right? And there's always ups and downs in your healing journey, right? It's always cyclical, right? So you're going up, but it's cyclical, right? There's going to be dips, there's going to be rises. That's part of life, right? Like I said, the polarity, right? There's expansion, contraction, right? There's winter, there's summer, right? Everything in life is a rhythm, right? Because when you start to establish relationship with yourself and come back into the body, things that were suppressed are going to start to rise. And that may be misconstrued as something that may be negative, right? So your anxiety might increase, your pain might increase, you might have more symptoms and sensations, right? You may feel more sad and depressed. Grief may come up, right? But that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing, actually, right? Because all that suppressed energy that you've been fighting to hold on to and protect, right, and push down, is finally able to have a voice. And once that clears through, then you have more space to allow more good into you. And then as a result, your nervous system regulates, right? So it doesn't have to be anything complex, right? It doesn't. But the simple things are the most difficult to do at times, right? If you look at any Olympic athlete, right, that's been training their entire life, right? They practice several movements millions of times, right? Several movements, right? If you look at a boxer, right, they do it's a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 different movements, right? Along with their defense, right? Slip, roll, pull, right? Parry, right? Right? High guard, protect, block, right? But you see how the movements are very simple, right? And it's not a lot in the recipe of the ingredients, but they practiced those fundamentals and foundations thousands, millions of times until they became experts and proficient at it, to where now they're doing it at a world-class level, right? So similarly, when it comes to your transformation, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, a lot of the work is very, very simple, right? But we live in a society where we want shortcuts. We want the quick fix, right? We want the instant fix. We want the pill to take. We want the supplement that's going to heal us. We want something that's just going to take away our pain, right? But like I said, nature does not work like that, right? There's not many things in nature that offer instant gratification like there are in today's society, right? And we've lost so much of our power that we're constantly looking outside in order to heal us, to take away our pain, to make us feel okay, right? It's a byproduct of Western society and consumerism culture, and then just the brainwashing and programming through our formative years, through school and stuff, that we need to always look outside of ourselves. The power is not within. We're these limited, weak creatures that constantly need external support, right? And we do need external support. So those are both half-truths, right? But at the same time, a lot of it, the medicine comes from within, right? Because your nervous system creates every hormone, creates every neurotransmitter, creates right? All of the chemistry, the pharmacy of chemistry can be created from the autonomic nervous system, right? So the medicine that you're seeking in that pharmaceutical or the external substance, right? Your body already can create that, actually, your nervous system, right? And when you're looking to Xanax or any kind of benzodiazepines, right? Your body can create that chemistry, right? Your body has a pharmacy that creates its own benzodiazepine, right? Through the pineal gland. Your body, when you think about you can't sleep, so you're taking melatonin, your pineal gland could create the melatonin, right? When you're thinking about smoking weed, right? You're trying to get all those endocannabinoids that are super healing, right? Your body has its own endocannabinoid system, right? Your body, you go to alcohol because you want to relax, right? You want to activate the GABA, right? The gamma amino butyric acid in your brain, so to downregulate, right? Your brain. Your body can create that, right? But we've lost the power within to affect our physiology because we've become so disconnected. And we were never taught this information in school, right? So, I hope this is landing. Start with the basics. If you learn that practice of sitting with yourself for 5, 10, even 20 minutes, right? Doing the reflection, observing the body, observing the thoughts, observing the environment, right? Starting to connect back to your breath, right? And starting to really connect to the mind and body, right? And just observe it without judgment and loving compassion and awareness. And just that practice will start to rewire your brain, start to calm the nervous system and regulate, okay? Because all our bodies want, all our brains want is for us to feel safe and connected. They just want us to listen, right? They want us to listen. They want us to hold space like you would for your best friend or a child that's hurt. What would you do? You would sit there with loving compassion and just observe, You're not trying to change them or fix them. It's like, yeah, I hear you. I'm here. That's all our body wants, right? And that loving awareness and presence is what creates the shift, right? And it could happen instantly, actually, But for others, it takes more time, right? So once you've established the loving awareness and compassion, right? Observation through mind, body, and the environment, then you can start making some profound changes, right? Reconnecting to the breath, right? Start processing some suppressed emotions and energy in a titrated fashion, right? And then what you can do is start rewiring those thoughts. Start installing new thoughts and beliefs into your subconscious, right? I'll go through more of these deeper practices in a future video, but understand it starts with the sacred practice with finding time in your day to sit with yourself, okay? And I know it doesn't sound sexy, right? It doesn't sound like, it's almost like too simple for it to work, right? But that's like most things, right? It's like if you're trying to improve your health, right? Start with what you're eating, start with what you're drinking, start with the people around you, your environment, and then get to the thoughts, emotions, right? Just have the foundations starting to fix your sleep, right? So fix the food, fix the water you're drinking, right? Fix the air that you're breathing in, getting out in nature more, staying off of electronics as much as possible, right? Fixing your sleep, right? Getting loving people around you, community, right? And then working with the thoughts, emotions, right? The pace that you go in life, right? Pausing throughout the day with these practices that I talked about. All of these are just foundational stuff, right? But ultimately, none of those things that I talked about is going to land if we don't come back to ourselves, come back to our bodies, right? And start to shift the thoughts and feelings within us, right? And start to process some of the suppressed emotions, right? Titrating, right? Establishing connection between mind and body again. And that will create the most lasting, rapid change in your physiology and your mental health, right? And then everything else that you do outside of it is going to be in unison, and it's going to work, right, interdependently as a result. And everything that you're doing, right, to try and improve and heal, all of that's going to land as a result, okay? So start with the practice of sitting with yourself, right? Having time, sacred time, observing the thoughts, observing the body, and then observing the environment, right? Starting to find gratitude and love in the heart, right? And slowly reconnecting with the intelligence within, right? And then as you do that practice, what you need to do is going to rise up, right? Because your soul is trying to speak to you, but you've silenced it for far too long, right? And as a result, the medicine and the intelligence within you has not had an avenue of to be able to speak, right? But when you start to give it the stage again, what you need to do is going to come to the surface. And you could trust that intelligence to start guiding you to what you need, the people that you need to surround yourself with, the protocol, the food that you like to eat, the career, right? My purpose. Everything's going to start to align as you connect back to your body. So this is why we're going to keep it simple to start, right? Keeping it super simple, connecting, right? Starting to establish connection with the body, the emotions, the thoughts, right? And then observing the environment, seeing what we can be grateful for in the environment. Now you're starting to rewire your brain. Now you're going to start to lower the fear of what's happening in your body and your mind, right? And as you do that and develop a healthy, loving relationship with your body and your mind, right? And creating a little bit of space between you and your suffering, now change is going to start to happen automatically, right? It may happen it may take some time, but ultimately if you stay consistent, right, the right answers are going to come to you through your intelligence. You're going to start to process some of that suppressed energy and emotions. You're going to start to shift those thought patterns, right? And begin to create space between those thought patterns and disidentify with them. And when you disidentify with them and you no longer have resistance, it fades away, right? And then your divine intelligence flows through, and now your truth comes back online, right? And your truth is always pure love, okay? So start with that practice. I hope this gave you an overall understanding of how important the autonomic nervous system is, right? I hope I gave you some practical examples of what may tip that nervous system out of balance. And I hope that I was able to give you some things that would help it come back into balance, right? And then I hope that you're able to implement this simple practice that I gave you at the end. To start implementing that awareness, that presence, right? And that loving compassion exercise into your life, right? It's super simple, like I said, but start with that 5 to 10 minutes, even if you want to stretch it to 20, 30 minutes. Honestly, the more the better, honest. In a disconnected society to where, you know, our ancestors usually, they would have been doing that most of the day, you know? And then, you know, they would have been, you know, probably working on whatever the land and then going hunting a couple times a week. But ultimately, they had a lot more time to sit and reflect. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're missing it's the biggest medicine that we're missing in our modern world. So giving yourself that gift, right? Presence awareness without judgment, with full love and compassion, right? And the answers will find you, okay? And then your body will naturally start to regulate as you establish safety within your body and your mind, right? If you know thyself, right? By knowing thyself, the healing naturally happens, right? Connection, right? Reconnection, right? Reconnection is what heals, because your truth is never sick, is never ill, right? Your truth already has all the answers, right? Higher power, source, universe, God created you perfectly, right? There's no chinks in your armor. We've just got disconnected from our true nature, right? Like, I love this philosophy in chiropractic where it says, nature needs no help, just no interference, right? So your body already knows what to do. Your brain already knows what to do, right? Just needs to feel safe enough again. It just needs to feel connected back to self again, back to our authentic soul, higher self, true self, right? And in that truth, disease or illness cannot exist, right? So apply these principles, right? Take that simple practice into your life, right? And then you can fine tune it, tweak it, and then add on top of that. I'll continue to, post videos, right, of practices you can do, right? And we'll continue to develop this relationship so that you can continue to find the healer within you, right? Find the medicine that's already within you, right? And activate that inner wisdom, right? Because you already know what you need, right? You've been lied to and blinded of what's already within you. That inner wisdom has been silenced for far too long, and all it wants is a voice, right? Because you have the answers for you, right? And I'm gonna tell you, man, no one's gonna come and save you, right? That's the bitter truth, right? There's gonna be people that support you along the way, but ultimately it's an inside job, right? And I don't even like the term job, but it's an internal returning back to self, right? Because once you return back to self and release the resistance, your body's gonna harmonize on its own, right? Because this intelligence is way smarter than our human mind, right? And once we get out of the way, it's gonna know what to do, right? So I hope this video helps. I hope it lands. And I hope that it really helps you in whatever area of your life that you're struggling with right now, right? Whether it may be physical, mental health, blocks in relationships, business, whatever it is, by regulating your nervous system and finding safety in body and mind, it will raise your frequency and your vibration, right? And you will cast a more coherent electromagnetic signature into your environment and within your body. And as a result, your life has no choice but to shift, right? Because when you change your energy, you change your life, right? Everything in your life is reflected of the energy within you and that you're casting out into your life, okay? So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, you could DM me on Instagram, link down below, or you can email me if you'd like to go deeper in this work with one-on-one coaching. If you need healing in mind, body, spirit, if you have any blocks in any area of your life, and if you're looking to transform, I'm here for you, okay? If not, just keep watching these videos, and I still want to hear from you. Comment down below how this video helps you. Like and subscribe, and let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in any area of mind, body, spirit transformation, consciousness, health, whatever it is. Love you guys. My name is Yuki Murai. Until next time, peace.